The umbrella stand at the entrance of the Siniel Sol's 59th floor private ballroom was made of black lacquered elm, imported from a workshop in Andong that had closed the year before, and inside it, at 7:34 p.m. on the 17th of November, rested a single bouquet of white lisianthus and pale gray astilbe, still wrapped in the florist's ivory ribbon, still faintly damp from the refrigerator in the service corridor. The bouquet had not yet been carried onto the stage. It would not be carried onto the stage. In 3 hours and 41 minutes, a security guard named Bay would find it exactly where the florist had placed it. And he would not know, because how could he know that the woman it had been prepared for was already 32 kilometers south of the Han River, sitting in the passenger seat of a black Mercedes S-Class, watching the taillights of the delivery vans ahead of her blur into a red thread through the rain. 11 floors below the ballroom, in the hotel's cigar lounge, Kang Min-jae was drinking a single measure of hibiki from a heavy glass he had not asked for, seated in a leather chair the color of dried blood, waiting for a phone call from his estate lawyer that would not come. He was 41 years old. His overcoat, folded across the chair beside him, was a navy wool cashmere from a tailor in Hanam-dong who had made his father's suits before his father had died in a hospital corridor in the winter of 2007. The scar on his left palm, a thin white crescent that he had earned in Busan at the age of 19, breaking a window that did not want to break, was resting on the marble tabletop, and he was looking at it the way a man looks at a page in a book. He read a long time ago and can no longer remember whether he understood. His Halmione, in the last year of her life, had said something to him about weddings. He could not, at that moment in the lounge, remember the exact words. He remembered only that she had said them while pressing doenjang into a stone jar with the flat of her hand, and that afterwards she had washed her hands 3 times in cold water, and that when she had dried them, she had looked at him and looked away, and that the not looking had felt like a verdict. He drank half the glass. He set it down. He watched the elevator doors on the far wall for 41 minutes. On paper, Kang Min-jae was the 3rd son of the Kang family of Seongbuk-dong, the president of Han-il Holdings Group's private security and logistics arm, the signatory of a joint venture agreement with a Singaporean maritime firm registered as of the 14th of October, the owner of a hanok in Bukchon that had belonged to his mother's family since the Japanese occupation, a hillside property in Yangpyeong where his grandfather had raised bees, and a black Mercedes Maybach S680 that his driver of 11 years, a man named Oh, kept parked in a garage on Tehran Row. He had been married once, at the age of 28, to a woman named Adaeze Kang, born Adaeze Okonkwo in Enugu, Nigeria, whom he had met while she was completing her doctorate in forensic accounting at the London School of Economics. Their son, whose Korean name was Kang Ji-ho and whose Igbo name was Chukwuemeka, meaning God has done well, had died at Asan Medical Center on the 14th floor on the 9th of March, 2019, of an anaphylactic reaction to a compound in an anesthetic administered before a routine tonsillectomy. He was 6. Adaeze had left him 1 year and 41 days after the funeral. She had not shouted. She had not filed. She had folded 3 suits into a garment bag, taken her son's photograph off the wall of the study, and boarded a flight to Zurich, where she had a cousin who worked in AML compliance for a private bank near Paradeplatz. She had signed nothing. He had signed nothing. They were, as of the 17th of November, still legally married under Korean family law, a fact his estate lawyer had reminded him of twice, and which he had, both times, waved off with the small motion of his scarred hand that meant later. Beside him tonight, in the ballroom 11 floors above, would stand a woman named Song Yi-rin, 28, the daughter of a shipping family from Tongyong, whom he had known for 14 months and had chosen because she was quiet at dinner and because her mother had wept once when speaking about the sea. Also beside him, as always, would stand Baek Tae-hoon, 42, his sworn brother of 19 years, godfather to the boy who had died, the only man in the room tonight who knew where the doenjang jar from his Halmione's kitchen was now kept. On paper, his mother had warned him 3 times. He remembered them now, sitting 11 floors below the ballroom, in the order in which they had happened, because his mother's warnings were the only sequence he had ever committed fully to memory. The first had been in the kitchen of the Bukchon Hanok in the 2nd week of September. She had been ladling anchovy broth over a small mound of hand-pulled sujebi, and the ladle had stopped in mid-air, and the broth had run over the edge of the ladle onto the counter, and she had not wiped it. She had said only that the Song family in Tongyong had lost a boat in 2011, and that the boat had not been insured with a company he would recognize. Then she had wiped the counter and served him without looking at his face. The second had been at the gate of the compound in Yangpyeong on a Sunday morning in October, when he had come to fetch a jar of gochujang his mother had promised him. She had walked him to the gate. She had held the jar with both hands. She had said, watching the crows in the persimmon tree, that a man who cannot see the difference between a woman who is quiet because she is peaceful and a woman who is quiet because she is calculating is a man who will one day sign something he should not have signed. Then she had put the jar in his hands and turned back to the house. The third had been at his own dining table on the 9th of November, 8 days before the ballroom. She had brought John, and she had brought a small dish of pickled radish, and she had eaten 3 pieces of John in silence, and then set down her chopsticks and looked at him across the table for a long time without saying anything. He had asked what was wrong. She had said, "When your grandmother pressed the doenjang, she pressed it 3 times, once for the family, once for the guests, and once for what she could not say aloud." Then she had picked up her chopsticks again and eaten. That was the first quotable line. He had heard it, and he had not heard it. He had been wrong. He did not yet know how wrong. The message arrived on the 18th of November at 4:12 a.m. on a burner phone he had bought in a small electronics shop in Yongsan at 11:47 on the morning of the 15th, paying in cash from a stack of 50,000 won notes he had drawn against a personal account at Shinhan the day before. The phone had been on the bedside table of the master suite in the Hanok, silent for 30 hours, and when it lit up the ceiling of the room in a pale blue that made the wooden beams look, for a moment, like the beams in a temple. The message was 3 lines. "If you want the truth, come alone. The lighthouse in Boseong. Bring nothing but your grandmother's ring." There was no name. There was no signature. The number was Singaporean. He knew the exchange because he had seen it once before, on a wire transfer confirmation Adaiz had shown him, in a different life, in a different kitchen, at a different hour. He read it twice. He laughed once, a short, dry sound that no one else in the Hanok heard. He drank the last of the barley tea in the cup on the bedside table, and he watched the ceiling for 41 minutes. And then he stood up and went to the safe behind the 3rd panel of the wardrobe and took out the ring. It was a plain gold band, thin, worn on the inside to the shape of a smaller finger. His Halmione had worn it for 53 years. His mother had given it to him on the day he had signed the papers for the Hanok. He had never given it to a Days. He had never given it to Song Yi Rin. He had kept it in a black velvet pouch inside a plain wooden box in the back of the safe. He put the pouch in the inner pocket of the navy overcoat. He called Oh. He said, Boseong. He did not say why. Oh did not ask. The drive took 4 hours and 38 minutes. The rain stopped somewhere south of Gwangju. When he arrived at the lighthouse, it was 9:47 in the morning, and the sea was the color of an old coin. He knocked on the small green door at the base of the lighthouse. He heard footsteps on iron stairs. The door opened. The woman on the other side of the door was Adayeze Okonkwo Kang. She was thinner than he remembered, in the way that grief thins a person from the inside outward. Her hair, which he had last seen loose to her shoulders, was cropped close to her skull now, silvered at the temples in a way that he understood after a second, was not age, but chemistry. She wore a charcoal wool coat, unbuttoned, over a plain black turtleneck, and in her left hand she held a manila folder, its edges softened by handling, tied with a length of cotton string. On the third finger of her right hand was a plain silver band he did not recognize. She had been born in Enugu in 1984, the second daughter of a civil engineer and a school teacher who had raised her on achebe and soyinka, and a proverb her mother repeated every morning, O bugi onye kwuru okwu na eme ihe, which the narrator will only gloss here once, as it is not the one who speaks, who acts. She had taken her doctorate at LSE in 2011. She had gone silent in 2019. She had, in the 56 months between the boy's funeral and this morning, been doing something. He was the only person at the lighthouse who did not yet know what. She looked at him. She did not smile. She said, in the same low voice she had used to read Ji-ho to sleep, Sit down, Min Jae-ya. There is a chair. I brought a thermos. He sat. If you are already leaning forward, if the hair on your forearms is standing a little, if you have forgotten for 1 full minute that your tea has gone cold on the counter beside you, then pause the story here, take a single breath, and press subscribe to Korean Mafia Family. Tap the bell so that when the next chapter comes, it comes to you first, at the hour it is meant to. What is about to unfold in the next 41 minutes of listening will reorder your understanding of loyalty in 3 places and rebuild it into something slower, harder, and far more human than the shape you walked in with. Stay. You are going to want to be in the room for what she opens next, and for what he does not do when she opens it. And when it is over, tell me one thing in the comments. When someone you loved chose your safety over your knowing, did you forgive them? And how long did it take? To understand what happened in that lighthouse, you have to go back. 13 years and 2 months. To a soul that no longer exists in either of their memories the way it actually was. A soul before the Yongsan skyline had filled in, before Itaewon had the meaning it has now, before a certain restaurant in Hanam-dong had closed and reopened under a different name and closed again. They had met in September of 2012 in the reading room of the British Library on Euston Road, where she had been finishing the 3rd chapter of her dissertation on layered shell companies in West African petroleum contracts. And he had been, at his father's instruction, pretending to be a graduate student in international finance in order to observe, without being observed, a Nigerian civil servant who used the same reading room every Tuesday. Kang Min-jae, at 28, had already been carrying his father's work for 4 years. He had not yet learned how to carry it without letting it show in his face. She had noticed the way he did not read the book in front of him. She had, over the course of 3 Tuesdays, decided he was either a very bad journalist or a very confused criminal. And she had, on the 4th Tuesday, walked up to the desk across from his, set down her coffee, and said in English, "You are not reading that book." He had said in English, "No, I am not." She had said, "Then buy me a proper coffee and tell me why." He had. He had told her the truth, not all of it, the part a man tells a woman in a library on a Tuesday. They were married 11 months later in a registrar's office in Islington, with 2 witnesses, her cousin from Zurich and a man from the Korean embassy in London whom his father had sent. And afterwards, they had eaten jollof rice and doenjang jjigae at a small flat in Hackney that she had rented for the year, and she had laughed at the way he ate the jollof, and he had laughed at the way she ate the doenjang, and the laughter had been, he understood only much later, the last uncomplicated laughter of his adult life. Ji-ho was born in the spring of 2013 at St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington. His Igbo name, Chukwuemeka, had been chosen by Adaezi's mother, who had flown in for the birth and stayed for 6 weeks and had, on the morning she left, pressed a small carved wooden bird into Adaezi's palm and said only "Kachi goziegi," which meant "May God bless you," and which was the only thing she said in Igbo to her daughter that entire visit, because she had not wanted to make the Korean son-in-law feel excluded at his own kitchen table. Kang Min-jae had, that morning, understood something he had not understood before. That grace was not always loud. That a woman could love her daughter's foreign husband simply by choosing which language not to speak in front of him. They had come back to Seoul in 2015, after his father's stroke. They had lived in the Bukchon Hanok. Adaez had learned enough Korean to argue with the fishmonger in Noryangjin and to read the labels on the doenjang jars in his mother's pantry. His mother, whose reserve had been famous in 3 neighborhoods, had taken Adaez into the kitchen on the 3rd day of her arrival and shown her, wordlessly, how to press the doenjang 3 times with the flat of her hand. Once for the family, once for the guests, once for what she could not say aloud. His mother had wept once, later that year, when Adaezi had, at the 100-day rice ceremony for Ji-ho, offered the first spoonful of rice to his Halmioni's photograph on the wall before offering it to the boy. His mother had not wept again in his presence for 11 years. Ji-ho grew up bilingual, then trilingual, Korean at the table, English with his mother when she was tired, Igbo with his grandmother on Sundays over video. He had his father's scar-hand tendency to hold objects a beat longer than necessary before setting them down. He had his mother's habit of finishing other people's sentences with a small nod. On the 8th of March, 2019, at Asan Medical Center, on the 14th floor, in the pre-operative suite of the Pediatric Otolaryngology Department, an anesthesiologist whose name was later redacted from the file administered a compound that Ji-ho's body did not know how to metabolize. The tonsillectomy was routine. The reaction was not. He died at 11:47 in the morning on the 9th of March. The cardiologist on call, a woman named Dr. Ryu, was the one who spoke to them. She said what she was permitted to say. She said only that. They buried him in Paju, at a hillside cemetery where the wind moved through the pine trees in a way that Adaezi, standing at the grave, had said sounded like her mother's kitchen at night. That was all she said. She did not say it again. The corrosion did not begin at the funeral. It began 4 months later when Kang Min-jae, going through Ji-ho's pediatrician's records at the request of the family lawyer, discovered that the anesthesiologist who had administered the compound had been paid a consulting fee of 41 million, won by a private clinic in Cheongdam 3 weeks before the surgery, and that the clinic was a subsidiary of a shell company registered in Labuan, and that the shell company's controlling signatory was a man he had known since he was 19, and that the man he had known since he was 19 was Baek Tae-hoon. He did not tell Adaeze. He told himself he would investigate. He told himself he would investigate properly. He told himself for 1 year and 41 days. He did not investigate. He drank. He signed contracts. He drank. He signed contracts. Adaeze packed 3 suits into a garment bag. She took the photograph of Ji-ho off the wall of the study. She flew to Zurich. She had not, in fact, gone silent. He had gone silent. She had gone to work. In the 56 months between the funeral and the mourning at the lighthouse, Adaeze Okonkwo Kang had been reconstructing, one wire transfer at a time, the architecture of the money that had ended her son. She had begun in Zurich, at her cousin's private bank near Paradeplatz, where she had taken a junior compliance position under her maiden name, and had, for 11 months, learned the specific texture of how Korean chaebol money entered the Swiss system through Liechtenstein trusts. She had left Zurich in the spring of 2021 for Singapore, where she had joined a maritime AML firm on Robinson Road, and had, over the course of 2 years, tracked the recurrent movement of funds between a Labuan shell called Pentacle Marine Holdings and a Singaporean nominee company called Aurelian Bay Consultancy, both of which resolved, at their 3rd and 4th layer of ownership respectively, to a man whose Korean identification number matched Baek Tae-hoon's by every digit except one, which had been altered in the Labuan filings by a clerk who had, 3 years later, been found in the harbor at Sentosa with a laceration to the temple and no wallet. That was the first death. Cause of death, official. Drowning. Cause of death, forensic doubt. The laceration was inconsistent with a fall from the dock at the tide table for that hour. She had, in the summer of 2023, flown to Vladivostok on a Korean-Russian dual passport she had never told him she held, and had, in a hotel room paid for in cash, met with a Goryeo Saram cyber forensics specialist named Elena Kim, who had, for a fee of 43 million, wired from a Cayman account Adaeze had opened under a trust in Ji-ho's Igbo name, delivered 41 months of extracted communications from a compromised device belonging to a mid-level accountant at Han-il Holdings' logistics arm. The accountant, whose name was Young Sai-ho, had emailed a woman in Cheongdam on the 2nd of February, 2019, 5 weeks before Ji-ho's surgery, a single line. The boy's father is signing on the 14th. She had memorized the line. She recited it now in the lighthouse, once, without inflection. That was the second death. Young Se-ho had, in October of 2023, fallen from the 8th floor of a building in Gasan Digital Complex. Cause of death, official, suicide. Cause of death, forensic doubt. The note on his desk had been typed on a machine that was not his. She had, in early 2024, contracted a maritime insurance investigator based in Labuan, a Malaysian-Chinese man named Tan Wei Ming, to reconstruct the 2011 loss of the Song family's fishing boat off the coast of Tongyong. Tan had discovered that the boat had been insured through Aurelian Bay Consultancy, that the payout had been 4,300,000,000 won, and that 3,100,000,000 won of that payout had, within 90 days, been transferred through 3 jurisdictions into an account held in the name of Baek Tae-hoon's late father-in-law, who had been in a persistent vegetative state at the time of the transfer. Tan Wei Ming had filed his report on the 11th of June, 2024. On the 17th of June, 2024, Tan Wei Ming had died of a myocardial infarction in his office in Labuan. Cause of death, official, heart attack. Cause of death, forensic doubt. He had passed a cardiac stress test 3 weeks earlier. 3 deaths, 3 doubts, 1 architecture. She placed the folder on the small iron table between them. She said in the same low voice, "Min Jae-ya." The engagement to Song Yi-rin was not arranged by her family. It was arranged by Tai-hoon, through her uncle. Because the merger you are about to sign on the 14th of December names her as a beneficiary of a trust that folds into Pentacle Marine within 90 days of the wedding. And once you sign, they will not need you alive. He read the folder. He read it twice. He set it down. He sat in the chair at the base of the lighthouse for a long time without speaking. The sea moved. The tea in the thermos went cold. Adais did not look at him. She looked at the horizon. He asked, finally, 3 questions. He asked, "Why now?" She said, "Because he moved on the 14th of October. The Singapore joint venture. I could not let you sign the second one." He asked, "Why come back?" She said, "I did not come back for you." That was the second quotable line. He waited. She said, "I came back because Jiho's grandmother is dying in Enugu, and she asked me, before she goes, to make sure the man who paid the anesthesiologist does not attend another child's funeral. I came back for a woman in Enugu, not for you, and I came back for the part of you that pressed the doenjang 3 times with your grandmother in a kitchen in 2004, because that part of you did not deserve to be buried with a boy who was 6. I did not come back for the part of you that drank for 406 days and signed nothing. That part of you I have already buried, and I am not in the business of resurrection." That was the 3rd quotable line, and it was the 4th as well, because it ran to 50 words and it did the work of both. He nodded. Once, he said, "What do you need from me?" She said, "Your signature on 3 documents before the 14th of December, and your silence until the prosecutor is ready." He said, "Yes." She said, "Come inside. The stairs are cold." He followed her up the iron stairs of the lighthouse. Halfway up, on the landing where the paint was peeling in long gray strips, she stopped and put her hand on the rail and did not turn around, and she said, without turning, "He was your brother, Min Jae-ya. I know. I am not asking you to hate him. I am asking you to see him." Then she went up the rest of the stairs, and he followed. The reckoning took place at 11:47 in the morning on the 4th of December, in the 17th floor boardroom of Han Il Holdings on Tehran Row, in a room whose carpet was the color of a bruised persimmon and whose long walnut table had been made 41 years earlier by a carpenter in Tongyong, who had also made a fishing boat for a family named Song. Kang Min-jae wore the navy overcoat. He did not take it off. He walked into the room at 11:44 and sat at the head of the table and waited 3 minutes without speaking. Baek Tae-hoon arrived at 11:47, on time as he had always been on time for 19 years, and sat at his usual place, 4 chairs down on the right, and smiled the small smile that had, for 19 years, meant, "Hyung-nim, I am here." Kang Min-jae placed objects on the table, one at a time. He did not raise his voice. He never did. He placed the Labuan filing, the one with the altered digit. He placed the Singaporean wire records from Aurelian Bay Consultancy, the transfers dated between the 2nd of February and the 23rd of March, 2019. He placed the extracted email from Jung Se-ho, printed on plain white paper, the line the boy's father is signing on the 14th underlined once in soft pencil. He placed the coroner's note for Tan Wei Ming, dated the 17th of June, 2024, from Labuan. He placed a USB drive, unlabeled, containing the 41 months of extracted communications. He placed, last, a notarized statement from Adayeze Okonkwo Kong, sworn under oath at the Korean consulate in Singapore on the 29th of November, 2024. He looked across the table. He said, one word, at a normal volume. Tai-huna. Baek Tae-hoon did not answer. He did not reach for the papers. He did not stand. He looked at the objects on the table, and then he looked at Kang Min-jae, and his mouth moved once, as if to shape a syllable, and then it closed. And the silence that followed was long enough that the woman taking minutes at the far end of the room stopped typing and set her hands in her lap. That was the fifth quotable line, the silence itself. Marked here, on the page, as a line, because in the room, at that moment, it was the loudest thing anyone had ever heard him say. Kang Min-jae stood up. He gathered the objects. He walked out of the boardroom. In the corridor, his estate lawyer was waiting with a second folder, which he did not open. He did not open it because he already knew what was in it, and because the not opening was, for the first time in his life, a choice, and not an evasion. The machinery turned. It turned in offices he did not sit in and courtrooms he did not attend. Court Order 2025-Hyung-Sang-1147, issued on the 11th of February, froze the assets of Pentacle Marine Holdings and Aurelian Bay Consultancy across 4 jurisdictions. Court Order 2025-Hyung-Sang-1189, issued on the 3rd of March, indicted Baek Tae-hoon on charges of aggravated fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and the specific and rarely invoked charge under Korean law of premeditated harm resulting in the death of a minor by proxy. Court Order 2025-Hyung-Sang-1214, issued on the 22nd of March, froze the personal accounts of 9 individuals whose names appeared on the notarized statement. 2 of them were politicians. One of them was a prosecutor who had, in 2007, presided over a case Kang Min-jae did not yet know the significance of. The press conference was held on the 8th of April in the courtyard of the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. Kang Min-jae did not attend. He drove instead to Paju, to the hillside cemetery, and he sat on the cold ground in front of a small gray stone that read, in Korean and in English and in Igbo, Kang Ji-ho / Chukwuemeka / March 4th, 2013 to March 9th, 2019. And he sat there for 41 minutes without speaking. He did not cry. He had not cried in front of another person since the 14th floor of Asan Medical Center on the 9th of March, 2019. And he did not intend to begin now. He had cried, once, alone, in the parking garage of the hospital, into the sleeve of a coat that was not the Navy overcoat. That coat he had thrown away. He began, that April, the slow work of returning, not to a daze, to the space in which a daze might, if she chose, agree to stand in the same room as him without leaving. He drove to Zurich in May, and he did not knock on the door of the flat near Paradeplatz where she was staying. He left, at the door, a small wooden box containing 3 Korean pears from the orchard in Yangpyeong that had belonged to his grandfather, packed in newsprint from a Seoul daily dated the day of Ji-ho's birth. He drove away without waiting to see if she opened it. In June, he sent, through her cousin, a small jar of doenjang his mother had pressed with her own hands, 3 times, in the kitchen of the Bukchon Hanok. He included no note. His mother had put the note in herself in her own handwriting, which said only Adaezeya, Kachi Gozie Gi, in Korean characters spelling out the Igbo she had learned from Adaeze's mother 11 years earlier at a 100-day rice ceremony in Paddington. In July, he sent a book. It was a slim volume of poems by Han Kang in the original Korean, with a translation into English by a professor at SOAS he had once met at a dinner in London. He marked one poem with a thin strip of cotton ribbon. He did not underline any lines. In August, she wrote back, not a letter, a photograph. It was a photograph of the small wooden bird her mother had given her at St. Mary's Hospital in 2013, resting on the windowsill of the flat in Zurich in the morning light, beside an empty espresso cup. There was no message. He understood the message. In September, she came to Seoul. She did not come to the Hanok. She met him at a small kitchen in Seongbuk-dong that had belonged to his Halmyeoni, and which he had kept exactly as she had left it, down to the stone jar of doenjang on the third shelf. Adaez wore the same charcoal coat she had worn at the lighthouse. She stood in the kitchen for a long time without speaking, and then she sat at the small pine table, and she said what she had come to say. She said, Min Jae-ya, I will not be your wife again. I will not take your name. I will not live in the Hanok. I will not press the doenjang in your mother's kitchen, though I love your mother, and she knows I love her. I will come to Paju with you on the 9th of March every year, and on the 4th of March, and on no other day. I will read the reports the Foundation produces, and I will sign what I need to sign. I will let you buy me coffee once a season, in Zurich or in Singapore or in Seoul, and I will tell you what I am reading. That is what I have to offer. That is what he did not manage to take from me. That was the 6th quotable line. He said, yes. The elder came in the second week of October, when the persimmons in the courtyard of the Hanok were beginning to soften on the branches, and his mother had, for the first time in 6 years, allowed a cook other than herself into the kitchen. The elder was Adaeze's mother, Mrs. Nkechi Okonkwo, who had flown from Enugu via Doha on a Qatar Airways flight paid for by a foundation that had not yet been named. She was 78. She wore a black wool coat over a wrapper of indigo and white, and she carried, in a small woven bag, a photograph in a plain wooden frame. She sat with Kang Min-jae in the small reception room of the Hanok. His mother served tea. His mother left. She did not need to be in the room for this. Mrs. Okonkwo said, in careful English, Min-jae, there is something my daughter has not told you, not because she was hiding it, because she was waiting for the right hand to hold it. She said in 2007 in a court in Enugu that was not honest. My other daughter, Adaeze's older sister, whose name was Chinwe, was accused of a fraud she did not commit. The prosecutor who took the case in Seoul, the one whose account was frozen in March, his name is Hwang Do-jin. He was, in 2007, a very junior lawyer on a bilateral corruption task force in West Africa. He testified, against instruction, that the evidence in Chinwe's case had been manufactured. He was reprimanded. He was sent home. Chinwe was released. She died the following year of complications from what they did to her in the holding cell. But she was released, and she died in her mother's house, not in a Nigerian prison. Because of Hwang Do-jin. She said, when Adaez went to Zurich, she went with a name. When she went to Singapore, she went with a name. When she came back to Seoul, she came back with a name. She did not tell you the name. She did not tell you because she did not want you to think she came back for a debt. She came back because a boy died in a hospital, and a man let it happen. And because a lawyer in a courtroom in Enugu in 2007 had, without knowing it, made her a person who could not let it happen twice. She placed the photograph on the low table between them. It was a photograph of two girls standing in a garden in Enugu, in a light that suggested late afternoon. The older girl had her arm around the younger. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, in 3 languages, was written Chinwe and Adaize, Enugu, 1996, my 2 daughters, 41 days before Chinwe went to university. Mrs. Okonkwo said, "I have come to ask one thing," she said. "The foundation my daughter is building, in your son's name, in Jiho's name, in Chukwuemeka's name. I want you to sign a deed that puts a small parcel of the Yangpyeong land, the parcel with the bees, into a trust in Chinwe's name as well. Not for me, for the child my daughter did not have because she was too busy carrying 2 ghosts. The trust will do what it does, but her name will be on the deed with his, so that when Adaize comes to the mountain and stands with the bees, she stands with both of them." That was the 7th quotable line. He read to the 3rd page. He signed. He did not read past the 3rd page. This time, the not reading was the gift. His mother came into the room, then quietly, with a small dish of jaune and a photograph in a plain wooden frame that she had, until that morning, kept in the drawer of the low chest in her bedroom. It was a photograph of his Halmioni in 1962, standing at the gate of the Yangpyeong compound, holding a stone jar of doenjang in both hands. Written on the back, in her own handwriting, was Kang Ok Ja, autumn 1962, the year she pressed the doenjang 3 times for the first time. His mother hung the photograph on the wall of the reception room, between the photograph of Jiho at the 100-day ceremony and the photograph Mrs. Okonkwo had brought of 2 girls in a garden in Enugu. 3 photographs, framed in plain wood, on one wall in one room in a hanok in Bukchon, in a city that had spent the year learning something it did not yet have a word for. A boy raises a hand and swears loyalty to another boy in a bar in Busan when they are 19 and pours himself a drink he cannot yet afford. A man buries the part of himself that thought loyalty was a thing sworn in bars and pours the drink for a woman who has already refused to marry him again, and who is, precisely for that reason, the only person in the room he has ever fully trusted. If you have listened this far, if you are still here at the wall with the 3 photographs, then tell me, in the comments, in your own words, in whatever language your grandmother spoke to you in the kitchen, what would you have signed without reading past the 3rd page for a name that was not yours to carry? And then, if it feels right, subscribe to Korean Mafia Family and stay for the next chapter. There is a kitchen in Seongbuk-dong where the doenjang has been pressed 3 times, and there is a door that has not yet been knocked on, and there is a woman on the other side of it who has been waiting, in her own way, for a very long time. Come back for her. Come back for the room. We will be here, at the wall, with the light on.